Getting too much spam and want to better protect your personal data? Then try Incogni and get a 60% discount on an annual subscription when you use offer code SKILLUP at incogni.com/skillup. Click below to get started or stick around to the end of the video to learn more.
You've heard of the Souls-like, but what about the Scrolls-like? Now that's a subgenre very rarely explored outside of the AAA space, perhaps because it's a little trickier to define and difficult for anything other than a AAA studio to achieve. How could a small team possibly hope to capture the scale and interactivity and immersion of an Elder Scrolls game? Enter Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon, an Elder Scrolls-inspired RPG from Polish studio Questline. This has been in early access for some time and released into 1.0 about a month ago. I've played it, I've finished it, and I gotta say, I'm very impressed with what this small studio has achieved. Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon is a Scrolls-like that actually manages to meet the expectations set by the Elder Scrolls series, with tons of characters and quest lines that I think are every bit as alluring and surprising as those found in Tamriel. It offers a comparable level of agency and world interactivity, where every decision you make leads to often meaningful and unexpected outcomes. Hell, in some ways, believe it or not, it even surpasses its inspirations. It's got an actually decent combat model that is visceral, agile, and broadly well-tuned. It's got compelling loot and deep character building systems that, for me, make exploration feel just as rewarding as the very best in the RPG genre. For all of this to come from a studio of just 50-odd people is pretty damn remarkable, and it held together so well in the first half of the game that I really thought I was in for a low-key masterpiece. But I suppose in keeping with the spirit of the Elder Scrolls, it does slightly buckle under the weight of its scope. As I said, this game's been in early access for a couple of years now, and the early parts of the game that have undergone that early access iteration are excellent. But there are also parts that haven't had that early access period, and that's where the cracks do begin to show in the combat, technical polish, and overall content quality. While those issues in the back half of the game did kind of take the wind out of my sails, they don't completely undermine the experience. For every janky boss fight or broken quest line, I have like 5 other memories of some awesome side story that completely caught me off guard, some intense duel against a mysterious character I chanced upon, or some arresting FromSoft coded castle reveal. Genuinely, my first 20 to 30 hours with this game were absolutely enchanting. Like legitimately some S-tier 10 out of 10 RPG gameplay right there. Studio Questline have gone for a quality over quantity approach when it comes to side quests, exploration, and itemization. They have placed a premium on decision making and character building, and all that makes for a brilliant RPG experience despite its rough edges. If you want to see what an Elder Scrolls game might look like when it's not made by Bethesda, but by fans of Elder Scrolls, Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon might be exactly what you're looking for. Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon offers a sort of dark fantasy twist on Arthurian legend. Think the Knights of the Round Table, Sword in the Stone, Merlin, Holy Grail, that sort of thing. In accordance with the legends, Arthur conquers Avalon with the help of Excalibur and his knights, and ushers in an age of peace and prosperity for all. But in the years since his passing, chaos has erupted on all fronts. The forces of Camelot rule the land with an iron fist, factions are divided, a deadly plague has begun to spread, and a strange mist known as the weirdness creeps in at night, birthing monsters and twisting the minds of any living being caught within it. Except you. The developers are not coy about their admiration for Oblivion, as you literally wake up in a prison cell with the preceding escape used to walk you through the game's systems. In your escape though, you come across the coffin of King Arthur. Part of Arthur's soul awakens, latches onto you, and he tasks you with retrieving the rest of his soul so that he might be resurrected and restore Avalon to its former glory. Now the main story is fine. It didn't really blow me away or anything, but I did appreciate how much it plays on your expectations of Arthurian legend. It's kind of a fascinating mythology in that there are so many different interpretations passed down through word of mouth, so there's actually no definitive true version of it. Obviously, I won't spoil anything, but piece by piece you come to learn the truth behind Arthur's feats, or at least Tainted Grail's twisted reinterpretation of them. Despite some awkward looking cutscenes with dialogue that is a little too on the nose, it's a story of moral dilemmas that I think is handled quite well. Even when I was confident in my stance on Arthur Arthur, around whether the sacrifice of a few to save the many can be justified, I'd often be hit with a reveal that had really challenged those thoughts. That's aided by the fact that the game kind of puts you in his shoes. The land is run by leaders too afraid to act, everyone just wants to save themselves from the incoming threat, so you as the player are thrust into making the tough calls that nobody else will, much like Arthur did himself. I think that's a really clever narrative conceit for an RPG, a genre that is fundamentally all about decision making. And decision making really is one of the ways in which this game shines. You are regularly given the option to ally or betray the characters you meet. For example, there was one instance where I was given the option to backstab a faction I just spent the last 10 or so hours trying to befriend, and not only did my decision result in the slaughter of those people, but the quest had me personally witness and take part in it, and this had knock-on effects. Even everyday NPCs are at the mercy of your decisions too. Attacking a guard does cause the entire battalion to come after you, as does stealing in plain sight. Saying the wrong thing can lock you out of quest lines. So yeah, if you were left disappointed by how, Avowed handled NPC reactivity and consequences to your choices, you'll be pleased to know that Tainted Grail doesn't hold back in that regard. What might catch you off guard is the overall tone. Given the dark fantasy aesthetic, I expected dialogue that was going to be heavy on that sort of old English poetry and mysticism akin to FromSoft's games. There's certainly some of that, and to be honest, those were my favorite interactions.
When the time of decline comes, let me shed my burden, so that I may spread the wings you bestowed upon me.
But most of the dialogue is more overt, oftentimes even leaning into comedy, much like the series it's inspired by. It did regularly get a laugh out of me, particularly when it was taking cheeky, self-aware jabs at the stereotypes of the RPG genre. For example, I'd have characters tease me about grave robbing or the audacity of expecting to meet the leader of a group after having just shown up out of nowhere.
What? Did you really expect that you could just enter our keep and head straight for the captain's quarters? There wouldn't be much point in having walls and guards here if anyone could just do that, would there?
The comedic dialogue is admittedly a bit jarring at first, but I quickly warmed up to it. I think it adds a nice amount of levity and personality to what would otherwise feel like kind of a derivative grimdark world. And this is especially true of the side quests. These are the real meat and potatoes of Tainted Grail. In fact, one of the coolest parts of this game is that 90% of the NPCs you bump into will have some sort of interesting quest chain for you, provided you don't piss them off. The sheer volume of side quests here is really impressive for a game made by an indie/AA team. If you're of the completionist mindset, maybe this all comes across as busy work, but for me, the amount of them made for a world that felt lived in and made me genuinely excited to talk to even the most unsuspecting stranger. And man, the side quests themselves are just so regularly surprising. I'd often expect a quest to be building up to some basic boss fight in some stock standard dungeon. Come to find that not only is every dungeon and cave completely bespoke, seriously, didn't see a single repeated layout in my playthrough, but often these side quests led to an outcome that I just never saw coming. Like this one, where I arrive at what I thought was going to be some druidic dungeon filled with traps and monsters, and instead find a undead chef. I speak to him and find out he's been living here for years just cooking away, and he's obsessed with this cheesy fish recipe that's just apparently so good that it transcends pleasure to instead bring pain.
You see, the logical conclusion of creating the most delicious food is something that flips the pleasure of eating on its head and brings it to the other side.
He marks a fishing spot on the map. I go out and catch the special fish he wants. I find some cheese. I return to him, and the man is so overjoyed that he gets to cook his cheesy fish thing that he rewards me with a spell. A spell that converts my own blood into blocks of cheese and can be used on an enemy to turn them into cheese. 10 out of 10 video game. Speaking of rewards, what Tainted Grail The Fall of Avalon absolutely nails is the loot. Many of the weapon and armor pieces you collect don't just have hefty flat bonuses, but they've also got more conditional ones, kind of reminiscent of ARPGs, like for example a shield that builds a stacking damage buff for every hit blocked, or an armor set that buffs damage while dual wielding, while also taking a portion of incoming damage out of mana instead of health. Not for nothing, but the gear doesn't just have cool bonuses, they also look cool, which might be kind of a superficial point for some of you, but for me, that's really appreciated as someone whose main incentive for doing anything in any game is for the fashion. This kind of itemization makes every side quest, every dungeon, every cave, and every locked chest so worth checking out. In Tainted Grail, if you see some castle in the distance, you bet your bottom dollar that at the top of that thing is some sick two-hander that might get you rethinking your entire build. On the topic of builds, the character building here is really great, and gear is just one part of that equation. Like the Elder Scrolls games, you've got attributes such as two-handing, one-handing, athletics, and alchemy that level up as you use them. Something I appreciated here is that things like your ability to craft armor and lockpick are not gated behind level thresholds. Their respective attributes just make them easier. You've also got another set of stats to put points into with each level. These provide flat increases, but are mostly used for meeting stat checks on gear to use them at max effectiveness, similar to a Souls-like. As if that wasn't enough, each of those stats also has their own associated skill trees. There's a lot of options here, and each point you spend feels like it has a measurable impact on your build. Between the gear, the stats, and the skill trees, there's just a lot to play around with here when it comes to the build craft. The moment I found my first summon spell, I went all in on a necromancer build, but then at one point I killed a mini boss that dropped a sword that deals cold damage, and boy did I want to make use of that Frostmourne looking thing. So I respec'd my skill tree to deal extra damage to foes inflicted by statuses, combined this with an ice spell, a shield that does an icy blast when parrying, and I then became an unstoppable frost knight that could freeze and execute enemies in an instant. So yeah, a lot of cool synergies to identify and build around there. My only criticism of the buildcraft is that experimentation is needlessly hamstrung by the respec system. The only way to reallocate both your stats and skill points is to use a specific potion that is not only rare but also limited in quantity. That kind of blows, to be honest. There are so many interesting items and builds that I had to miss out on using because of this. Yes, it helps to incentivize repeat playthroughs, but personally, I'd rather just not do that. I recognize this is not a new thing, by the way. I leveled the exact same criticism to Lies of P, and I'd say the same for even Elden Ring. I think it's an archaic way of handling things. It would be nice to see the studio patch in an alternative, because I think it only gets in the way of what is otherwise excellent character building systems. So the characters and side quests are great. For me, they're every bit as charming and as surprising as what the Elder Scrolls games offer up. I think the itemization and buildcraft is even better than what Bethesda offers. All of that combined makes exploration in Tainted Grail feel incredibly rewarding, which for me is one of the main things I want out of an RPG. What should have been an easy win for Tainted Grail then is the combat, seeing as Bethesda has kind of always fallen short in that regard. And yeah, I'll say up front that the combat is better, much better, but as I got closer to the end of the game, I realized that this isn't quite the complete home run I'd hoped for.
Nothing here to respect me.
The combat in Tainted Grail is, for the most part, quite good. It's heavily geared around dodges and parries. These consume a lot of stamina, but you also regain stamina very quickly. It kind of has the flow of a Souls-like, but just a little faster. It took a little bit before I finally got used to the rhythm of it, but once it clicked, combat felt tactical and also responsive. You always feel in control, in that you can always dodge or parry an attack mid-animation, so I never found myself frustrated by the slower weapons or caught out by less obvious enemy telegraphs. Combat also has a real sense of weight. Enemies react appropriately to melee swings. Critical strikes produce a deeply satisfying slow-mo effect. Magic feels great too. I'm not usually into that kind of playstyle, but here every spell has a light and heavy attack that can function a little differently. I mentioned that cheese spell already, but another example is one like this that spews fire on the heavy attack or does a close range fire blast on the light attack.
Show me what you're made of.
You can dual wield spells, weapons, hell, you can even dual wield shields, because why not? You can bind each of your weapon combos to this weapon wheel for quick access, which is very nice. I also like that combat rewards accuracy. You deal less damage to armored parts and more damage to weak points, so you're encouraged to properly learn each weapon's moveset and to actually aim your attacks rather than swing wildly. Tainted Grail is also quite well tuned, which was especially refreshing after having just played the Oblivion remaster. There are a number of of difficulties you can switch between as you please, but on the standard difficulty, I found that the game presented just the right amount of challenge. It's tuned such that even the most mundane encounter can be a tense back and forth, and it encourages you to interact with all the other systems like alchemy, cooking, and smithing in order to keep pace. So yeah, there's quite a well-developed, engaging combat model here, especially when compared to the Elder Scrolls games, where combat is pretty lackluster. The thing is, all this works really great against humanoid enemies, and for the first 2/3 of the game, the majority of the enemies you fight are humanoid enemies. They've got their own stamina meters that can be predictably tracked, their attacks are easy enough to read, but as you progress further, you start to encounter more and more of those non-human enemies, like floating wraiths, giant frogs, goblins, and fey creatures. And these are just not fun to fight. Their movement is comically fast, their animations are rather stilted and poorly telegraphed, particularly their ranged attacks, which just feel like they come out of nowhere. Same can be said for the boss fights, which are also just so not good. Look, I know Elder Scrolls isn't exactly known for great boss fights either, but given how fundamentally solid the combat system here is in Tainted Grail, it really sucks to see it undermined during these climactic encounters. They too have poor telegraphing, stiff animations, and movesets that are basically identical across all bosses. The larger bosses are especially janky, as they have trouble tracking you, they get caught on terrain. I mean, just look at this. I also think their difficulty tuning isn't in line with the rest of the game. Their damage scaling feels like it's cranked up to compensate for all these problems, or they'll just spawn a bunch of extra mobs to deal with, making the fights borderline unmanageable. Basically, all that strategic back and forth kind of goes out the window when fighting non-humanoid creatures and bosses, which is a real problem in the back half of the game where you're doing a lot of that. That's not the only thing that gets worse the further you go. The game has its fair share of bugs as well. My summons would often go invisible or just stand around doing nothing in combat. I'd see this weird ghosting effect on NPC animations. I accrued like half a dozen quest lines that were seemingly bugged. I noticed a fair bit of voiceover cutting off early and some voices just missing entirely. And it seems that's not where the technical issues end. Performance seems to be shaky as well. I personally didn't have too many problems aside from some environmental pop-in and brief stutters during autosaves. However, I am playing on a pretty high-end rig with an RTX 4080. Looking at the Steam reviews, I've seen even many of the positive reviews calling out poor performance on their rigs, and it seems like consoles have it a lot worse, unable to achieve a locked 60 on performance mode, with even the PS5 Pro suffering from stutters and screen tearing. Tainted Grail is a decent looking game, beautiful at times. While character models look a little worse for wear, I'd regularly come upon environments that would stop me in my tracks with their impressive composition, lighting, and sense of scale. But it's hardly pushing graphical boundaries, and so in that sense, it certainly doesn't run as well as it should. But not only does the combat and performance wane the further you go, I'd say the same for the game's overall content quality. The final region felt less dense with points of interest, meaningful loot drops became scarcer, the new characters and side quests were okay, but not nearly as captivating as those found in the earlier areas. The final act of the game didn't get any of that early access testing, it's completely new with 1.0 launch, and unfortunately, it does show. So yeah, Tainted Grail is a little rough around the edges. I expect follow-up patches will iron out those technical issues, but problems like late-game enemy design and boss encounters would require significant overhauls. But I don't think these issues completely muddy what Studio Questline have achieved here. Like I said in the intro, for every frustrating moment, I had a handful of other awesome experiences in my pocket. This is an RPG that nails that sense of discovery. It has so much to see and do that you'll lose an easy 50 plus hours cruising through it. It's a Scrolls-like with combat that, for the most part, is actually good and elevated by some meaningful character building systems. To get all of that from a team of just 50 odd people and for the price of just $45 US, that, I think, is well worth celebrating. So that's my review of Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon. I'd best describe this as an unpolished gem. It's something rare, something beautiful, but needs just a little more work before it can truly shine. It almost feels like another Kingdom Come Deliverance situation. It's ambitious, it's got some great systems, it deeply understands what makes a good RPG, but its less refined parts and technical flaws hold it back from greatness. In that sense, I hope we do see a sequel one day that does smooth over those issues, that ups the production value, that further builds on the excellent foundations laid here. I think if that happens, we may very well see a Tainted Grail 2 that cements itself as an RPG masterpiece, just as KCD 2 has. Because yeah, I can't stress enough just how good those fundamental RPG aspects are. No exaggeration, not since Elden Ring have I had this much fun exploring a game world, getting regularly distracted by something on the horizon, and most of the time walking away from it with a cool item and a cool story to share. Questline are clearly big fans of the Elder Scrolls, Oblivion in particular. It's obvious this team has played the hell out of that game, they have studied it, they recognize its strengths and its shortcomings. Because of that, they've been able to successfully recreate much of what people love about Oblivion and fill in some of its gaps with either their own ideas or elements from other RPGs they love. It stands as a testament to the power of early access, really. I have to give massive kudos to the community that stood by this game over the years, and to the developers for acting on all their feedback, because what they've created here is a pretty impressive game that kind of feels like a celebration of the RPG genre, and while it's far from perfect, it has all the makings of a truly great RPG. For that reason, I recommend Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon.
Your personal data is probably floating around in more places than you think, and trying to reclaim it is really tricky, but it's made a lot easier thanks to this video's sponsor, Incogni. Sure, we know big corporations like Apple and Google have our data because we hand it over to them, but what you probably don't know is that hundreds of other companies that you've never heard of also have your data because it's been on-sold by various data brokers. These companies can then on-sell your data to other companies, spammers, or worse, malicious actors looking to use your personal data to commit identity theft. Now, the loophole here is that you can technically contact these companies and ask them to delete your data, but not only do you not know who has your data, but there are so many of these data brokers that it would be impossible for you to contact all of them. That's where Incogni comes in. You sign up, you enter your details, you grant it the required permissions, and after that, Incogni does all the work for you, sending out hundreds of automated requests to reclaim your data. Take me, for example. Incogni has sent out over 147 requests on my behalf, which has resulted in my data being removed from 138 data brokers. 138! I had absolutely no idea that 138 data brokers even had my data, and now thankfully they don't, thanks to Incogni. If I was to have submitted all those requests myself, doing all the paperwork and the back and forth, it would have taken me around 103 hours, making Incogni incredibly well priced given how much value it delivers. I've absolutely noticed a significant reduction in the amount of spam, emails, and texts I've been getting, and it just feels nice to know that my data is more secure since no one wants their personal information being held by some company that you didn't even know existed. It's super easy, super effective, and best of all, super affordable. You can use code SKILLUP at incogni.com/skillup to get 60% off an annual subscription. Take your personal data back and get a 60% discount while doing it by visiting incogni.com/skillup and using offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Thanks Incogni for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.